He looked at the man on the bench and made a decision. Not a careful decision, not a legal one, a reflexive one. He saw a hoodie. He saw dark skin. He saw someone who did not belong. What Officer Dale Pruitt did not see was the Navy Cross. He did not see the 14 years of service. He did not see the two teammates whose names were now carved into a memorial wall in Virginia. He did not see the kind of man who had walked into situations that would have broken most people in half and walked back out standing. He saw a target, and that single catastrophic mistake was about to cost him everything he had spent 22 years building. This is the story of what happens when a man who believes the badge is a weapon meets a man who was forged in fire. And this is the story of what real justice looks like when it finally arrives. The morning air in Crestwood, North Carolina carried that particular kind of quiet that only exists in small, wealthy suburbs on weekday mornings. It was the kind of quiet that had been purchased at a premium. Manicured hedges, pristine sidewalks, the distant civilized hum of a leaf blower 3 streets over. Crestwood sat just outside Charlotte, tucked into a crescent of old money and newer ambition, a town where people nodded at each other from behind their car windows and called it community. Marcus Webb had been here for 11 minutes. He sat on a wrought iron bench at the center of Crestwood Park, a paper cup of black coffee warming both hands, his eyes moving slowly across the open green space, the way a man's eyes move when they have spent years scanning for things that can kill him and are now finally trying to stop. He was 36 years old. To anyone passing by, he looked like a man in his mid-30s taking a quiet morning off. Gray hoodie, dark joggers, worn running shoes that had seen serious miles. He had the kind of physical presence that registered even when he was sitting down. Broad through the shoulders, completely still. Hands that were large and scarred in ways that hands do not get from office work. But it was his eyes that would have told the real story to anyone trained to read it. They were not resting. They tracked the delivery van turning the corner on Elm without appearing to move. They noted the older woman with the golden retriever who crossed to the other sidewalk. They cataloged exits, angles, distances the way a compass needle finds north. Not because it is trying to, but because that is simply what it does. 14 years as a Navy SEAL does not leave you when the mission ends. It becomes the architecture of how you see the world. Marcus was on mandatory decompression leave. 30 days ordered by the command psychologist after the operation in West Africa. He did not like talking about the operation. He did not talk about the 2 men from his platoon who had not come back. He thought about them every morning when he woke up, and he thought about them now sitting in this quiet park, in this manicured suburb, holding a paper cup of coffee he had bought from a shop 3 blocks over, whose barista had smiled at him and asked how his morning was going. Fine, he had said, and meant it mostly. He was in Crestwood to see General Raymond Cole, retired Marine, 68 years old. The man who had pulled a 22-year-old Marcus Webb aside after a training exercise in Coronado and told him without ceremony that he had something rare and that he had better not waste it. Marcus had not wasted it. They were scheduled to meet at 10 in the morning at Cole's house on Whitmore Street, 4 blocks from the park. It was 9:42. Marcus had arrived early because men like Marcus Webb are always early. He had bought the coffee because he needed something to do with his hands. He sat on the bench because the park was there, and the morning was quiet, and for the first time in months, nobody needed him to make a decision that would determine whether people lived or died. The quiet felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. He was working on accepting it. 3 miles away on the far side of Crestwood, a patrol cruiser rolled down Penfield Avenue at a pace that was slower than traffic law required but faster than courtesy suggested. Behind the wheel sat Officer Dale Pruitt. He was 47 years old. He had been with the Crestwood Police Department for 22 years. He had a thick neck and a jaw that seemed to be permanently set against something a low-grade contempt for the world that had calcified into his resting expression over the course of 2 decades. In the passenger seat sat Officer Kevin Story, 24 years old, 8 months on the job. Still possessed of the belief, however fragile it was becoming, that police work was fundamentally about helping people, Story was learning, not the things they teach at the academy, the other things, the unwritten curriculum. He was learning it from Dale Pruitt, which meant he was learning the wrong version of everything. "Do you understand what this job actually is, Miller?" Pruitt used to call every young partner by the wrong name for the first month. It was a dominance test disguised as absent-mindedness. Story had stopped correcting him after the 3rd time. "The badge is a filter." Pruitt continued, one thick hand on the wheel, the other resting on the window frame like he owned the air outside. "It separates the people who belong from the people who are passing through. You understand that?" Story said yes because it was easier, because no Pruitt would ask, and no required a conversation that Story did not have the standing to survive. "Your job is to maintain the standard," Pruitt said. "You see something that doesn't fit, you investigate. You don't wait for a crime to happen. You prevent it by letting certain people know that you are watching." Story looked out the passenger window at the passing storefronts. The barber shop, the dry cleaner. A woman pushing a stroller on the sidewalk who glanced at the cruiser the way most people glance at police cruisers when they have done nothing wrong and are still not sure that is enough. Dale Pruitt had 17 excessive force complaints in his personnel file. 8 years' worth of incidents documented, filed, forwarded up the chain. 13 of the 17 involved Black or Latino men. Every single complaint had been buried by the Crestwood Police Benevolent Association, whose president Gary Holt had owed Pruitt a personal favor since 2019 when Pruitt had been the only witness willing to testify on behalf of Holt's son during an ugly incident at a bar on Route 9. The favor had been repaid 17 times over. Chief Sandra Okafor had been trying to build a case against Pruitt for 14 months. She needed one more incident he could not explain away. She was about to get it. Pruitt's cruiser turned onto the street that ran along the eastern edge of Crestwood Park. He was not looking for anything specific. He was doing what he always did on morning patrol, which was scan his territory for anything that registered as wrong. His definition of wrong had never been codified anywhere. It lived in his gut, and in his gut wrong was almost always a specific set of signals that he had never bothered to examine too carefully. The young mothers with the strollers. The elderly couple feeding pigeons near the fountain. The jogger in the expensive shoes. Then Marcus Webb. Pruitt's foot eased off the accelerator before his brain had fully processed what he was doing. He read the scene in under 2 seconds. Black male, hoodie, alone. On a bench. In this neighborhood. In his neighborhood. The light at the intersection ahead turned green. Pruitt did not move. Story felt the deceleration and looked up from the notepad, where he had been writing a report from their previous stop. "What is it?" Pruitt did not answer. He engaged the turn signal and pulled the cruiser slowly to the curb at the park entrance. He killed the engine. He sat for a moment watching Marcus through the windshield from across the park. Story followed his gaze. He saw a man on a bench drinking coffee. He saw, if he was being honest with himself, nothing. Pruitt reached for the door handle. Marcus saw the cruiser the moment it slowed. He had been watching it from behind the rim of his coffee cup since it turned onto the park road, the same way he tracked everything that moved within his field of vision, not anxiously, but automatically. He watched it pull to the curb. He watched the engine kill. Internal threat condition green to yellow. He took a slow sip of his coffee. He watched through the side mirror of a parked car across the path as the driver's door opened and a heavy-set officer in his late 40s stepped out, adjusted his belt, and put on a pair of aviator sunglasses. The park was shaded by oak trees that were 90 years old. There was no sun to block. The sunglasses were not about visibility. Marcus had seen the move before, not from police officers, but from men in other situations in other countries, men who wanted to be authorities without being faces. He set his cup on his knee and waited. Pruitt walked the length of the park path with his feet wide apart and his hands near his belt in that particular stance that was designed to communicate, "I have already decided who you are." He stopped 5 feet from Marcus. Marcus did not look up immediately. He finished the thought he was having. He set the cup beside him on the bench. Then he raised his head and offered a slow, measured nod. "Morning, officer." His voice was level, deep baritone, the voice of a man who had given orders in situations where a wrong tone of voice got people killed. Pruitt did not return the greeting. He chewed his gum slowly and stared down through the aviators. "You live around here." It was not a question. The inflection was all wrong for a question. It was a challenge wearing a question's clothes. Marcus read it accurately. "Visiting," he said. "Visiting who?" "A friend." Pruitt let out a short sound that was not quite a laugh. "A friend." He repeated it like it was the least convincing thing he had heard all week. "Does this friend have a name?" "An address?" Marcus looked at him steadily. "He does. But I'm not sure why that's relevant, officer. I'm drinking coffee in a public park." Pruitt took one deliberate step closer. Invasion of personal space, calculated. "I know everyone in this town," Pruitt said. "I don't know you. We've had break-ins. Shady characters casing houses in the morning." "I'm not casing anything," Marcus said. "I'm waiting for a meeting." "In a hoodie," Pruitt said, letting his eyes travel down Marcus the way an inspector examines a suspicious package. "On a work day, you got somewhere to be a job." Marcus felt something cold settle behind his sternum. Not anger. Something older than anger. The feeling of a man who has been profiled so cleanly, so automatically, that the officer doing it does not even realize he is doing it. "I have a job," Marcus said. "I'm on leave. Let me see some ID." Pruitt extended his hand, palm up, like a man who was used to the gesture being completed without question. Marcus paused. He knew the law. Crestwood operated under North Carolina statutes. North Carolina was not a stop-and-identify state. Without reasonable suspicion of a specific crime, an officer could not compel identification. Sitting on a public bench drinking coffee was not reasonable suspicion of anything. Officer Marcus said carefully, "Am I being detained? Have I committed a crime?" The color in Pruitt's face shifted. A deep flush began at his collar and moved upward. He was not used to no. Not here. Not in his park. Not from this kind of man. He was used to deference. He was used to the particular look that comes across a person's face when they decide that compliance is safer than confrontation. He had not seen that look from Marcus. He was not going to see it. "I asked you for identification," Pruitt said, his voice climbing half a register. "You can do this easy, or we can make it complicated." A jogger on the path nearby slowed without stopping, ears tuned to something that had changed in the air. A woman walking a terrier on a leash shortened her route and crossed to the other path. "I'm asking you for the legal basis of this stop," Marcus said. "If I'm not being detained, I'd like to finish my coffee." Pruitt took off his sunglasses. His eyes were small and pale, and full of the specific kind of irritation that comes not from being threatened, but from being questioned. "You want to play lawyer?" He said it flatly. "Okay, stand up. I'm comfortable here." "I said stand up." Pruitt's voice cracked across the morning air like a board splitting. Across the park, two teenagers on the path stopped. One of them reached into his pocket. A screen lit up. A man walking a golden retriever turned at the sound and stood still. Pruitt saw the phone. It did not make him cautious. It made him angrier, and it gave him an audience which in Pruitt's psychology was almost the same thing as permission. He wanted to show Crestwood what he did for it. He wanted them to see him handling the threat, even if the threat was a man who had not moved from a bench. "I'm going to tell you one more time," Pruitt said, stepping close enough that Marcus could smell the stale tobacco and spearmint mixing on his breath. "ID now, or I put you in cuffs for failure to comply." Marcus assessed the situation with the same rapid clarity he used when a mission went sideways. Pruitt was escalating beyond any legal justification. If Marcus reached for his wallet, Pruitt might claim he was reaching for a weapon. If he did not, Pruitt would get physical. "Officer," Marcus said, and his voice dropped. Not louder. Lower, colder, like a pressure drop before a storm. "You are making a mistake. I am telling you right now before this goes further that you are making a mistake. My ID is in my back pocket. I'm willing to show you if you can tell me what crime I'm suspected of. But if you put your hands on me, what happens next will not be good for you. Not physically, I won't touch you, but professionally, you are about to end your career." Pruitt stared at him. Then he laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. "Your career," he said. "Son, I am the law in this park. I have been the law in this town for 22 years. You think some hoodie on a bench is going to threaten me?" He lunged. Not for the cuffs, for Marcus's hoodie. He grabbed the front of it with both hands, intending to yank Marcus upright off the bench the way you yank a weed from the ground. It was like grabbing a load-bearing wall. Marcus did not move. His core engaged, his weight dropped fractionally, and he simply did not go anywhere. Pruitt stumbled, caught off balance by the resistance. In the same instant, Marcus's right hand moved. Not fast in the way a punch is fast. Fast in the way a trap closes smooth and total and without wasted motion. He wrapped his hand around Pruitt's wrist, the one clutching the hoodie, and held it. Not to harm, to stop. "Let go," Marcus said. Pruitt's brain registered the grip. The strength in it was not the strength of a gym. It was the strength of a man who had been trained to do specific things with his body under extreme pressure. And the specific thing that grip communicated was that Pruitt was at a significant disadvantage in a physical confrontation, and he had approximately 1 second to understand that. His pride did not give him the second. "Get your hands off a police officer," Pruitt screamed. He wrenched his wrist free with his other hand, stumbling back and reached for his taser. The crackle of electricity snapped through the air. "Taser," Pruitt shouted. "Taser." The sound hit the gathering crowd like a starter pistol. The teenager's phone was up and recording, now live. Marcus released Pruitt's wrist and raised both hands, palms open and visible in one smooth motion. He understood what was happening. He had been in enough situations where the only way to win was to survive first. If he fought back now, they would shoot him. He would endure the indignity. He would win the war. "I am complying," Marcus said loudly and clearly, looking not at Pruitt but at the cameras. "I am unarmed. I am not resisting." Pruitt was breathing hard. His face was beet red. The taser was aimed at Marcus's chest. "Get on the ground," Pruitt ordered. "Face down, hands behind your back, now." Marcus went to his knees deliberately, then to his stomach. He crossed his ankles and placed his hands behind his back, fingers interlocked. It was the posture of a man who had been through SERE school. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. He had been through stress positions that made this look comfortable. He had endured training scenarios that were designed to break men who thought they were unbreakable. Dale Pruitt pressing a knee into his back and ratcheting handcuffs onto his wrists was an inconvenience by comparison. "Gotcha now?" Pruitt whispered close to his ear. His voice was low-hot with triumph. He said 3 words after that. 3 words that were specific and deliberate and degrading. 2 of the people watching recorded that moment. They did not know yet that the camera on Pruitt's own body would record it too, through the post-shutdown buffer in audio so clear it could have been recorded in a studio. But they knew what they heard, and they kept filming. Pruitt hauled Marcus to his feet. Marcus stood. His face was composed. He looked as someone would later write in a news article, like a king in chains. "Check my back pocket," Marcus said. "My wallet is there, my ID is inside." Pruitt reached in and pulled the wallet out. He flipped it open with the casual contempt of a man who expected to find a community college ID or a library card. He froze. The card in the window slot was not a driver's license. It was a DOD Common Access card, the kind that opens doors inside buildings that most people do not know exist. Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. Pruitt stared at it. He turned it over. He read the back. He turned it over again. Beside the CAC card, folded and laminated, was a unit challenge coin that bore an insignia that anyone with a serious military background would have recognized immediately. Behind the plastic sleeve was a photograph. A man in navy dress whites, chest covered in decorations, standing beside a 4-star general. The man was younger in the photograph, but the face was unmistakable. It was Marcus Webb. The decoration on his chest, the one positioned highest, was the Navy Cross. Pruitt looked from the photograph to the man standing in front of him. He looked back at the photograph. "So you're a sailor," Pruitt said. It came out thinner than he intended. The bravado was still there, but the structure had gone out of it. Doesn't give you the right to resist a lawful order. "Look at the other card," Marcus said. His voice was steady, patient, the way a person speaks to someone who is going to regret everything they have done in the next 30 minutes and has not realized it yet. Pruitt pulled out the card behind the challenge coin. It was an emergency contact card. The first name on the list was not a wife. It was not a mother. It read, Cole Raymond, General, USMC retired, followed by 2 phone numbers. The second number had a prefix that Pruitt did not recognize. It was a direct line to the Pentagon's Judge Advocate General office. The world tilted slightly. Pruitt felt it. He was too far in. The crowd was watching. The phones were still up. He could not uncuff this man and apologize. Backing down in front of an audience felt to Dale Pruitt worse than being wrong. This was the fundamental flaw in his character laid bare in a public park on a Tuesday morning. He would rather be catastrophically wrong than seen to be wrong. "I don't care who you know," Pruitt said, shoving the wallet into his own pocket. "You're going to the station. We'll sort it out there." He gripped Marcus's arm and began marching him toward the cruiser. The sound of a car door hitting the curb stopped him. Not the sound of a car stopping. The sound of a car that had already stopped and someone getting out fast. Pruitt turned. A black SUV sat behind his cruiser driver's door open. The man who had stepped out was in his late 60s. Silver hair, a polo shirt, a cane in his right hand. He walked toward Pruitt with the cane touching the ground, as a formality the way men walk with canes, when they do not actually need them but were told by doctors that they should use them. His posture was the posture of a man who had spent decades being the most important person in rooms full of important people. What in God's name, the man said, his voice carrying across the park like a public address system. "Do you think you are doing to my commander?" Pruitt looked at him the way Pruitt looked at most people who were not police officers, which was with a baseline assumption of authority that he would revoke only if absolutely necessary. He saw a senior citizen interfering with an arrest. "Step back," Sir Pruitt warned. "This is an active police matter. Interfere, and you will join him in the back of the car." The old man did not step back. He walked directly to Pruitt, closing the distance between them until he was close enough that Pruitt would have taken a step back from most people. He did not take a step back from this man. He could not explain why. There was something in the stillness of him, something in the way the air itself seemed to reorganize around him that made Pruitt's feet stay where they were. "I am General Raymond Cole, United States Marine Corps, retired," the man said. "And the man you have in handcuffs is Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, a decorated member of Naval Special Warfare. You have 10 seconds, Sergeant. 10 seconds to take those cuffs off, return his property, and pray that he decides this ends here." The words registered. Pruitt processed them. A seal. This man, he had already committed. The cuffs were on. The crowd was filming. The decision had been made. In Pruitt's world, the only thing worse than being wrong was being seen to reverse yourself. "I don't care if he's Captain America," Pruitt said, and shoved Marcus toward the cruiser's rear door. He resisted arrest. "He assaulted an officer. He's going downtown." "Assault," Cole said, and his voice dropped half an octave, which somehow made it louder. "I was watching from my car, Sergeant. He did not touch you. You touched him. You escalated a lawful encounter into a civil rights violation because you did not like what he looked like." "Tell it to the judge," Pruitt said. He grabbed the top of Marcus's head the way officers do to guide people into vehicles, and pushed him into the back of the cruiser. Marcus did not struggle. Through the window his eyes found Cole. The look was not a plea. It was an instruction. Cole read it. He nodded once, a single minimal movement that contained an entire conversation. He was already reaching for his phone as Pruitt slammed the rear door. "You are making a career-ending mistake," Cole said, his voice carrying through the glass. Pruitt laughed. "My union rep will have this cleared up by lunch," he said. "Go home, sir." He got in the cruiser, hit the lights unnecessarily, and peeled away from the curb. He wanted the spectacle. He wanted Crestwood to see him working. He had no idea that the most important phone call of his life was being made on the sidewalk behind him by a retired Marine general who had the personal cell number of a sitting United States senator. Inside the cruiser, the air conditioning blasted. Marcus sat in the rear cage and said nothing. He leaned his head against the seat back and closed his eyes. Pruitt checked the rearview mirror, expecting to see fear or anger. He saw a man who looked faintly bored. "Not so tough now," Pruitt said. "The military might let you play whatever game you want overseas. But here in this town, I'm the one with the badge. I'm the general here." Marcus opened one eye. "You have the right to remain silent, Sergeant," he said. "I'd recommend you use it. Everything you're saying is being recorded by your own dashboard camera." Pruitt reached forward and pressed the button that killed the interior camera. "Whoops," he said. "Technical malfunction." That Marcus said without moving, without raising his voice, is a felony. Tampering with evidence. "It's my word against yours," Pruitt said, pulling into the station's sally port. "And I've got the badge." The garage door rolled down behind them. Pruitt had no way of knowing that the camera he had just shut off was a model equipped with a post-shutdown audio buffer. 30 seconds of pre-event video. 90 seconds of post-shutdown audio. A fail-safe feature specifically designed to prevent exactly what Pruitt had just done. His words in the car were already captured. The 3 words he had whispered into Marcus's ear in the park were captured. The whole thing was sitting in a server somewhere waiting. The Oak Haven police station was cinder block and fluorescent lights, and the specific institutional smell of places that process human misery at scale. Pruitt marched Marcus through the back entrance and into the booking area with the stride of a man delivering a prize. The desk officer, Carla Reyes, looked up from her monitor. She was 41 years old, 12 years on the force, and she had the particular facial expression of someone who has processed enough paperwork to recognize trouble before it announces itself. "Got a big one," Pruitt said, dropping Marcus's wallet on her desk with a slap. "Claims he's Navy. Resisted arrest, grabbed my wrist the whole show." Reyes picked up the wallet. She opened it. She looked at the CAC card for 3 full seconds without speaking. Then she looked at Marcus, then at Pruitt. "Dale," she said carefully, "this is a DOD Common Access card. Lieutenant Commander. This is an 05. That's a commissioned officer. He's a suspect," Pruitt said. "Book him. Full processing. Prints photo everything. Put him in the system." Reyes did not say anything else. But she looked at Pruitt in a way that said everything she was not saying. Marcus stood at the counter in silence while they went through the ritual. Shoelaces, belt, watch. They took his coffee cup, which had somehow made it into the cruiser with him. They took the challenge coin from his pocket. He submitted to the mugshot without expression. Turn left, flash, turn right, flash. The camera captured a man whose face showed nothing because he had trained himself in environments far worse than this to show nothing. He had been waterboarded during Siri training. He had been held in a stress position for 43 hours during a training scenario in the mountains of Nevada that had broken 6 men in his cohort. He had been in a dark room in Kandahar for 11 hours while a situation outside sorted itself out, listening to sounds he would not describe to anyone. Standing in a fluorescent-lit room while a middle-aged police officer with a receding hairline took his shoelaces was not a challenge. It was inconvenient. Pruitt sat him in a metal chair in the holding cell and left the cuffs on. Then he sat just outside the cell and began writing his report. He was good at reports. He had written a lot of them. He had a facility for language that transformed reality into something more favorable. Suspect assumed aggressive stance. Officer identified threat indicators. Suspect verbalized threats. Physical contact initiated by suspect. Officer feared for his safety. He was writing the paragraph about how Marcus had lunged at him when the front door of the station hit the wall so hard the sound echoed through the entire building. Pruitt's pen skipped across the paper. He turned. Chief Sandra Okafor stood in the doorway. She was 53 years old, and she had the compressed energy of a person who had been working towards something for a very long time and has just arrived. Her face was not calm. It was controlled, which is a different thing entirely. Controlled is what calm looks like when it is working very hard. Behind her were 2 men in dark suits. Not local. The shoes were wrong for local. The posture was federal. Behind them was a woman in a blazer carrying a briefcase, who had the particular walk of someone from a prosecutor's office. And behind all of them, moving with a cane and the unhurried certainty of a man who had already won, was General Raymond Cole. Miller Chief Okafor said. She used the wrong name, not because she did not know his, because using the wrong name was a way of beginning the process of making him smaller. Pruitt stood up. "Chief, what's going on? I was just finishing the report on—" "Get away from that cell," Okafor said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The 2 federal agents had already moved to positions that covered the angles of the room in a way that was not accidental. Pruitt stepped back. Okafor moved to the holding cell door. She pulled out her keys. Her hands were steady. She unlocked the door. She walked inside and crouched in front of Marcus. "Commander Webb," she said. Her voice had changed completely. "I am so sorry. Please let me." She reached behind him and personally unlocked the handcuffs. Marcus brought his hands around and looked at his wrists. The marks were deep enough that they would be visible for days. He stood. "Chief." "What is this?" Pruitt said, his voice pitching toward something that was not quite panic but was in the same area code. "I have charges. I have a report. He assaulted me." "You do not have a report," said the woman with the briefcase, stepping forward. "You have evidence of a federal offense." She opened the briefcase. "I am Assistant United States Attorney Vanessa Monroe," she said. "And these are Special Agents Garza and Kim from the FBI Civil Rights Division. We have been briefed." Pruitt felt the floor become less certain under his feet. "FBI," he said, "for a loitering stop." General Cole stepped around the agents and stopped 5 feet from Pruitt. He looked at him the way a man looks at something he has evaluated and found to be exactly what he suspected. "You did not stop a loiterer," Sergeant Pruitt Cole said. "You illegally detained a commissioned naval officer on authorized leave. You fabricated probable cause. You used excessive force on a man who was sitting on a bench. You falsified a police report in real time. You tampered with evidence by manually shutting down your recording equipment. And your camera's audio buffer recorded every word you said in that car after you did it." The room was very quiet. "I didn't know," Pruitt said. "He didn't show ID. He refused." "He tried," Marcus said. It was the first time Marcus had spoken since entering the station. His voice was level and unhurried, and it carried the specific weight of a man who has been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. He walked out of the cell. He stopped 2 feet from Pruitt. "You told me it didn't matter who I was," Marcus said. "You told me you were the law." He looked at Pruitt for a moment. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Chief Okafor turned to Pruitt. "Badge," she said. "And your weapon, now." Pruitt looked at her. "Sandra," he said. "We've worked together for 8 years. Come on. This is a misunderstanding. One bad stop, give me a suspension." "I don't have a choice, Dale," Okafor said. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who has made a decision and will not be moved from it. "Do you know who just called my office the mayor? Do you know who called him the governor's office? Do you know who called the governor?" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Pruitt unclipped his holster. He placed his Glock on the counter. Then, with fingers that were not entirely steady, he unpinned the silver shield from his chest. It had been on his chest for 22 years. It had been in ways he had never fully examined the only thing he was certain he was. He put it on the counter next to the gun. "You are suspended without pay, pending internal and federal investigations," Okafor said. "You are to leave this building immediately." Pruitt looked at Marcus. He looked at Cole. He looked at Reyes, who was studying something on her monitor with great concentration. He looked at the other officers who had filtered into the doorways and were now looking at the floor, the ceiling, anywhere except at him. 22 years. Not one of them. "I need a ride," Pruitt said. His car was still at the park. "Walk," Marcus said. Pruitt looked at him. "You made me walk from that bench to your cruiser in handcuffs in front of 30 people," Marcus said. "Walk." Pruitt looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. The door swung shut behind him, and the room exhaled. What Pruitt expected when he pushed through the front door of the Crestwood police station was the quiet street he had left behind that morning. He got something else entirely. The sidewalk was solid press, not local. Satellite trucks from 3 national networks had their masts raised. Camera operators had positioned themselves along the police tape that someone had strung across the entrance. Reporters stood in practiced broadcast postures, earpieces, and waiting. The teenagers' live stream from the park had been running for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The clip of Pruitt whispering into Marcus's ear while his knee was in Marcus's back had been viewed 1.4 million times. The clip of Marcus standing after being handcuffed, looking as one comment put it, like a man who was certain the world was about to correct itself, was playing in a loop on the screen of a reporter's phone 20 feet away. Pruitt stopped. The sound hit him like a physical force. Questions overlapped each other into a wall of noise. Officer Pruitt. Sergeant Pruitt. Can you respond to the video? Did you know he was a Navy SEAL? What did you say to him when you had him on the ground? He put his head down and aimed for the employee parking lot. His truck was there. He just needed to get to his truck. A reporter from a national cable network put a microphone over the police tape. The governor has called your actions a serious abuse of power, Sergeant. Do you have a comment for the people watching? No comment, Pruitt said. His voice came out smaller than he expected, thinner. He reached the lot. He found his truck, and he stopped. Someone had found the truck first. The driver's side had been keyed from the front fender to the rear door. Deep, deliberate cuts. On the windshield was a single paper that someone had slipped under the wiper. He did not read it. He got in, started the engine with hands that were shaking more than he wanted them to be, and pulled out of the lot too fast, clipping a curb, the cameras catching all of it. The drive home was 15 minutes. It felt like the longest drive of his life. Every car behind him felt like surveillance. Every person on a phone felt like an extension of the crowd outside the station. He turned onto his street. He pulled into his driveway too fast and hit the garage door opener before the truck had fully stopped. The door came down. Darkness. He sat in the garage with the engine running for a moment. Then he turned it off. Dana, he called, opening the door to the kitchen. He called it before he had fully stepped inside. He called it because the house felt wrong, and calling her name was the thing you do when a house feels wrong. Dana. Silence. Not the easy silence of a house where someone is in another room. The heavy silence of a house where no one is. He walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator was bare of the drawings his son had put there. 3 of them done in crayon that had been on the fridge for so long, Pruitt had stopped seeing them. The counter was cleared. The mail pile was gone. On the island, a single piece of paper. Beside it, his father's police badge. Not his own badge, his father's. He had kept it in the bedroom drawer for 20 years, the thing he pulled out when he needed to remember why he had joined. Dana had left it here. He picked up the paper. Her handwriting was very even. She wrote like she was trying to be careful. Dale. My sister called me this morning. She had seen a video. I did not know what she was talking about, so I looked it up. I watched it with Travis. He is 11 years old, Dale. He watched his father push a man's face into the ground and say things that he knew even at 11 that a person should not say. He asked me if you hate black people. I did not know what to tell him. I have taken Travis to my mother's house in Greensboro. Please do not come. Please do not call. You have always loved that badge more than anything in this house. Now you have it. Pruitt stood in the kitchen for a long time. He wanted to be angry at Dana. He tried to build the anger the way he always built it, from the familiar materials of victimhood and justification. She was overreacting. She had not been there. She did not understand the job. He built it up, and it collapsed. Because in the kitchen alone, without the uniform and the badge and the weight of 2 decades of institutional cover, he could not hold it. His boy had watched the video. His boy had asked that question. He sank to the floor, back against the dishwasher, his father's badge in his hand. He sat there for a long time. He did not sleep that night. He watched the news until 3 a.m, the way a man presses on a bruise, hurting himself on purpose, because at least the pain is familiar. He watched Marcus give a brief press conference outside the station. Marcus was in a clean shirt, the hoodie long gone, and he stood beside a woman in a gray blazer who carried herself with the concentrated energy of a person who does this for a living and is very good at it. Marcus spoke for less than 2 minutes. He did not describe what had happened to him in angry terms. He did not use the word victim. He said simply that this had happened to him, and it would continue to happen to others until the structure that allowed it was dismantled, not just the individuals within it. The woman beside him was Diane Osei, the civil rights attorney, the name registered in Pruitt's chest like a stone dropping into cold water. He had heard of Diane Osei. Everyone in law enforcement in North Carolina had heard of Diane Osei. She did not lose. He turned the television off. At 8 the next morning, his phone rang. Gary Holt, union president. The man who had buried 17 complaints. The fixer. Gary Pruitt said, and his voice had the quality of a man grabbing a rope over a drop. "Thank God. I need you to..." "Dale." Holt's voice had a texture Pruitt had never heard from it before. Flat, businesslike. The voice of a man who had already made a decision and was now in the administrative phase of implementing it. "I'm calling to inform you that the union board voted at midnight. We are withdrawing legal representation effective immediately." Pruitt went still. "You can't do that. I pay dues. You're obligated." "We are obligated to represent officers who act within the scope of their duties," Holt said. The board reviewed the body camera audio from yesterday afternoon. He paused. "Dale, there's 90 seconds of audio from after you shut the camera off. We heard what you said to him in the car. We heard what you said when you had him on the ground." Pruitt did not respond. "This is not a gray area." Holt continued. "The Fraternal Order of Police at the state level has already issued a statement. We cannot spend the pension fund defending what is on that recording." "Gary?" Pruitt's voice cracked slightly. "They're going to charge me federally. I need a lawyer." "Then I suggest you find a private one," Holt said. "And Dale. Yeah. Don't come to the lodge." The line went dead. Pruitt sat in his kitchen looking at the phone in his hand. 22 years. The institution he had believed was impenetrable had just closed the door on him with the same efficiency with which it had protected him for 2 decades. He was not going to examine the irony of that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was there. The federal courthouse in Charlotte was built from a stone that was gray, in a way that suggested permanence, the kind of architecture that wants you to understand before you enter that the things decided inside will outlast you. For Dale Pruitt, walking up those steps 3 months later in a suit he had bought at a discount store because his good clothes had been seized as part of the civil asset process, it was not a monument to permanence. It was a tomb. He had spent the interim period in the specific hell of a man waiting for a future he cannot control. His savings were largely gone transferred to retainer payments for a private attorney who had taken the case with the enthusiasm of someone accepting a losing hand but needing the fee. His house was in foreclosure proceedings. The bank had moved fast once the assets were formally frozen. He had stayed in a single room at a motel on Route 9 for 6 weeks, before a cousin in Wilmington had offered the spare bedroom with a notable absence of warmth. He had not spoken to Dana. He had called Travis twice. Travis had answered both times, quiet and careful in the way children are when they are waiting to see which version of an adult is on the phone. The conversations had been short. Pruitt had said the things fathers say. Travis had said the things children say when they do not know what else to say. Neither call had reached anything real. The courthouse steps were lined with cameras. There were no supporters, no signs, no officers in solidarity. The officers stationed at the perimeter kept their eyes forward as Pruitt climbed the steps. Not one of them acknowledged him. Inside courtroom 4B was standing room only. The press gallery was full. The public gallery was full. The air felt dense with the particular weight of a room full of people who believe they are witnessing something that matters. Pruitt's attorney, a man named Gerald Sims, who charged $240 an hour and who Pruitt was now paying with money borrowed against what remained of his retirement account, sat at the defense table, looking like a man who has accepted the mathematics of a situation. At the prosecution table, the setup was different in kind. Assistant United States Attorney Vanessa Monroe sat at the center, flanked by 2 junior attorneys and a paralegal whose job appeared to be producing the correct document at the correct moment with machine-like efficiency. Beside Monroe sat Diane Osei, representing Marcus in the parallel civil suit present by arrangement with the court. Diane Osei had a way of sitting at a legal table that communicated without any visible effort that the outcome of proceedings was something she was already aware of. But it was the gallery that made Pruitt's chest tighten as he found his seat. In the front row sat General Raymond Cole upright and absolutely still, his cane resting across his knees. Beside him sat a woman Pruitt recognized from the news, Senator Patricia Wren, Democrat, North Carolina, member of the Armed Services Committee, veteran. She was looking at the defense table with an expression that was not hostile. It was categorical, the expression of someone who has classified something and moved on. Behind Cole and the senator sat 6 men. They were physically diverse. Different builds, different features, different ages between what appeared to be late 20s and early 40s. But they all shared something, the same quality of stillness, the same way of holding a room without appearing to be doing anything. They sat with their arms crossed, not in the aggressive way of a challenge, but in the contained way of men who are accustomed to waiting. Marcus Webb had not asked them to come. They had come because the kind of man Marcus was made the kind of men who showed up for him. His platoon. Personal leave, their own expense. Pruitt saw them. He looked away. Marcus sat in the first row of the public gallery behind the prosecution table. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him the way tailored clothing fits a man who does not often wear tailored clothing but looks exactly right in it. He did not look at Pruitt. He looked at the judge's bench with the focused calm of a man attending a briefing. The trial did not need theatrics. A U.A. Monroe had understood from the beginning that the case was a series of documented facts arranged in chronological order, and the jury needed only to be walked through them clearly and without embellishment. Day 1 was witness testimony. The woman with the terrier, the man with the golden retriever, the older couple who had been near the fountain. 3 separate accounts of the same event, with the same sequence, with the same unprovoked escalation. Day 2 was the teenager's footage. 4 minutes and 17 seconds, played on the courtroom screen in its entirety. The courtroom was very quiet during the playback. Marcus sitting on the bench. Marcus drinking coffee. Pruitt approaching. The body language of a man manufacturing authority. The escalation, the physical contact. Marcus going to the ground, arms raised, the cuffing, and then the moment. Pruitt crouching close to Marcus's ear. What he said was not audible on the teenager's recording, but the way he said it was. And the jury watched it. Day 3 was Dr. Leon Marsh, FBI Digital Forensics. A man who spent 20 minutes explaining in terms that were precise but not inaccessible the specific technical architecture of the body camera model used by the Crestwood PD, the post-event audio buffer, the 90-second window, the server log that showed a manual shutdown. Monroe walked to the audio system. She addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "what you are about to hear is the audio captured by Officer Dale Pruitt's own recording device during the 90 seconds following his manual shutdown of the camera." She pressed play. The courtroom heard the sound of a car interior, the hum of a running engine, the hiss of air conditioning, and then Pruitt's voice. "Not so tough now, are you?" And then the 3 words he had said when Marcus was on the ground. Clear, specific, racial, undeniable. And then whoops, technical malfunction. And then, that's a felony, tampering with evidence, and then, it's my word against yours. I've got the badge. The playback ended. The courtroom was very quiet. One juror in the back row, a woman in her 60s, had her eyes closed. She was not sleeping. She was doing something with her face that she did not want anyone to see. The cross-examination of Pruitt on day 4 was the event that people who were in the courtroom would describe for years afterward. Pruitt had taken the stand at Sims's recommendation, a decision made in the belief that a jury of North Carolinians would respond to a 22-year veteran's personal account of his fear in the moment. Monroe approached the stand. She did not start with the hard questions. She started with the body camera. "Officer Pruitt, you stated in your initial report that your camera malfunctioned." "That's correct." "And Dr. Marsh testified that the device log shows a manual shutdown, a deliberate press of the power button. There can be accidental presses." Monroe nodded. She walked to the evidence table and picked up a printed document. "Your body camera model requires a sustained 3-second press of the power button to initiate shutdown. Is that correct?" "I don't know the exact specifications." She handed him the manufacturer's documentation. He read it. "Is that correct?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "So an accidental shutdown would require an accidental sustained 3-second press." Sims objected. Monroe rephrased. She moved to the teenager's footage. She paused it on a specific frame. She asked Pruitt to identify the exact moment he had feared for his safety. Pruitt looked at the frame. Marcus sitting on the bench. Legs loosely crossed. Cup of coffee on the armrest. He was looking at me in an aggressive way. Monroe let the courtroom look at the still image of a man sitting down drinking coffee. She let it sit for 5 full seconds. "Would you describe this image as aggressive Sergeant Pruitt?" It was his demeanor. "Defiance," Monroe said. "Yes. Is defiance a crime in the state of North Carolina?" Sims objected. "Sustained," Monroe rephrased. "Did Commander Washington commit any crime prior to you initiating physical contact?" "He refused to identify himself, which is his right under state law, is it not?" Pruitt's jaw tightened. He looked at the jury. He looked at Sims. He looked at the 6 men in the gallery who had not moved since the trial began, and who were watching him with expressions of absolute and terrible patience. He looked at Marcus, who was watching him the way a man watches something he has already finished with. Did Commander Washington have the legal right to remain seated and decline to show identification? Monroe asked. Pruitt's hands gripped the railing of the witness stand. "When I tell someone to comply, Monroe," he said, his voice lifting out of the controlled register. "It had been in all morning. When I give a lawful order on my street in my town, a person complies. I don't care if he's a SEAL or a senator. When I say, move, you move." He had slammed his palm on the railing. The sound cracked through the courtroom. Sims had his hand on his forehead. Monroe smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a person who has been waiting for something to happen, and it has now happened exactly as anticipated. "No further questions, Your Honor." The jury deliberated for 74 minutes. When they filed back in, not one of them looked at Dale Pruitt. The foreperson, a man of about 50 in a blue button-down shirt, read from the verdict form in a voice that did not waver. "We, the jury, find the defendant Dale Thomas Pruitt guilty. Guilty of deprivation of rights under color of law. Guilty of falsifying an official police report. Guilty of assault. Guilty of perjury." Judge Miriam Ashworth looked at Pruitt over the top of her reading glasses. She had a reputation for terseness. Today, she was not terse. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "please stand." He stood. His legs did not feel entirely reliable. He held the edge of the table. "You took a position of public trust," she said, "and you used it as a personal weapon. You did not serve your community for 22 years. For 22 years you conducted yourself as though your community existed to be managed by you, according to your own private classification of who deserved to walk its streets freely." She paused. "You targeted a man who has given more to this country than most of us will ever be asked to give. When you were caught, you lied on paper, you lied under oath, and you attempted to destroy the evidence of your own actions." She set down her papers. "On the federal charges, the court sentences you to 108 months in a federal correctional institution. There will be no early release. The court also orders the permanent revocation of your law enforcement certification in the state of North Carolina and any other jurisdiction in which you have held or applied for such certification." She picked up the second document. "In the matter of the parallel civil suit, Washington versus Pruitt, the court finds that qualified immunity does not apply given the documented presence of malicious intent. You are personally liable for the full judgment. The court awards the plaintiff $3,800,000 in punitive damages payable from your personal assets." She looked at him one final time. The gavel came down. The sound was very sharp in a very quiet room. Pruitt stood for a moment with his hands on the table. The federal marshals came for him. He did not fight. He turned and held his wrists out the way he had told so many people to hold their wrists out over the years. The platoon in the gallery stood, all 6 of them, in unison. They did not cheer. They did not speak. They stood and they stayed standing in the specific silence of men who have seen enough of the world to know that this moment did not call for noise. Marcus did not stand. He sat in his chair and watched Pruitt be walked out of the courtroom. His face was composed. His hands were folded in his lap. His wrists still carried the faint marks of the handcuffs. He looked at them briefly. Then he looked at General Cole, who nodded once. The same nod as in the park. A single, minimal movement that contained everything. Diane Ossie announced the disposition of the civil judgment at a press conference on the courthouse steps. She stood at a microphone in the afternoon sun with Marcus beside her and read from a prepared statement. "Commander Webb has elected to donate the full amount of the civil judgment to establish the Cole-Webb Foundation for Veteran Civil Rights. The foundation will provide legal defense services free of charge to military veterans who face civil rights violations." She folded the paper. "Commander Webb has one statement." Marcus stepped to the microphone. He was quiet for a moment. "Pruitt wanted to make me feel like I had no value," he said. "The foundation makes sure that the next man Pruitt would have picked will have somewhere to call." He stepped back. He did not take questions. 2 days after the sentencing, federal marshals arrived at a house in Crestwood. Pruitt was not there. He was already processing. Dana was there loading the last boxes into her sister's truck. She watched from the driveway as they went through the house. They took the boat on the trailer in the backyard, purchased on credit. They took the gun safe. They took the truck, the Ford, that had been Pruitt's primary identity for 6 years, backed it out of the garage on a tow hook, and hauled it away toward a federal auction. The proceeds would go to the Cole-Webb Foundation. Dana watched the truck go. She did not cry. She had done her crying. She finished loading her boxes. She got into her sister's car. She drove to Greensboro to pick up her son. Travis had been at his grandmother's for 3 months. When he came out of the house and she held him, he was quiet against her shoulder the way children are when they have been holding something and are not sure yet if it is safe to put it down. "It's okay," she told him. "We're okay." He did not ask about his father. She did not volunteer. The Federal Correctional Institution at Butner, North Carolina sits about an hour northeast of Raleigh. It is not designed for comfort. It is designed for containment. Dale Pruitt was processed in on a Thursday morning. He was given a number, inmate 51774. He was no longer Sergeant Pruitt. He was not even Dale. He was a number on a form, and the number did not know or care about 22 years, or a silver shield, or the particular pride a man takes in believing himself to be necessary. Former law enforcement officers in federal institutions are placed in protective custody as a standard procedure. Pruitt would spend 23 hours a day in a concrete room the size of a large closet. He would have a cot, a sink, a toilet, a small window set high in the wall. He would have 1 hour of outdoor time in a small enclosed yard. He would have no audience, no one to establish authority over, no one who cared what he thought or what he wanted. He was the smallest man in the building, not physically, but in every way that had mattered to him. On a shelf in a storage unit in Crestwood, paying $47 a month because Dana had not yet decided what to do with it, sat a cardboard box. Inside the box, wrapped in a dish towel, was his father's police badge, the one that had sat on the kitchen island the night she left. The one she had put there not as cruelty, but as a statement that she was not going to be responsible for it anymore. She had not thrown it away. She would, but not yet. 6 months after the verdict, on a morning in early October, when the air had that particular crispness that comes to North Carolina in the fall, Marcus Webb sat on the bench in Crestwood Park. Same bench. Same black coffee. The paper cup warm in both hands. He had driven up from Charlotte to close something. He was not sure exactly what. He was not the kind of man who examined the ritual dimensions of things, but he had wanted to sit on this bench again on a morning like this morning and be in it without what had been in it before. He was alone. The park was quiet. A pair of older women power-walked along the far path. A man let his border collie run free near the fountain, laughing when the dog skidded on the damp grass. A patrol cruiser rolled slowly down the park road. Marcus watched it. The officer inside was young. Female. She drove with her window down. She slowed as she passed the bench. Not the way Pruitt had slowed. She looked at Marcus. She raised 2 fingers off the steering wheel. A small wave. The wave of an officer acknowledging a citizen having a quiet morning in a public park. Marcus raised his cup slightly. She drove on. He watched the cruiser until it turned the corner. Then he looked down at his coffee. He thought about the 2 men from his team who had not come back from West Africa. He thought about them every morning. He would think about them every morning for the rest of his life. He thought about Travis Pruitt, 11 years old, who had asked his mother a question she could not answer. He thought about the men who would call the Cole Webb Foundation in the months and years ahead, men who had served and come home and been treated as if their service was invisible, as if the country they had bled for had a different set of rules for them. He thought about all of it, and then he took a long sip of his coffee, and he let the morning be quiet. He had earned this quiet. He had earned it twice. The bench was just a bench. The park was just a park. The town was just a town, but he was still here, sitting in it, freely, and that meant something. Justice does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a gavel, sometimes in the form of a number on a prison intake form. Sometimes it arrives in the silence of men standing up in a courtroom, not cheering, just standing because standing is enough. Dale Pruitt had spent 22 years believing the badge was a wall that nothing could get through. He learned what Marcus Webb's first mentor had told a young man decades ago, that what you are is more permanent than what you carry, that dignity does not require a uniform, that the men who believe themselves to be untouchable are often the ones who have never been tested by anything real. Marcus Webb had been tested by everything real. He had not broken. Not in the mountains. Not on the ground in a park with his hands behind his back. Not in a holding cell with cut wrists and fluorescent lights. He had simply waited for the world to correct itself. And he had made sure through the foundation, through the donation, through every quiet, deliberate choice he made from the moment he sat down on that bench, that the correction would outlast the incident that made it necessary. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe to our channel. Not for the click, but because these stories matter. Because the men and women who served deserve to walk through their country freely. Because dignity is not conditional. And because the next time someone on a bench looks up and sees a cruiser slowing down, maybe because enough people kept watching and kept demanding better what happens next is different. The bench is still there. The park is still there. And somewhere a man who believed he was the most powerful thing in his own small world is counting the hours in a concrete room with nothing to enforce and no one to perform for learning the last lesson of his life. That power borrowed from a badge is not power at all, and that some men cannot be moved. Not by 22 years, not by a taser, not by a knee in the back, not by anything. There is something particular about the way a man who has spent years in extreme environments learns to measure time, not by clocks, not by schedules, by pressure. Marcus Webb had measured time in missions, in the seconds before a breach, in the hours of surveillance that preceded 30 seconds of action, in the long, grinding patience of waiting for intelligence to confirm what instinct already knew. He was measuring time differently now, sitting in that holding cell. The cuffs had been removed finally after Reyes had come back and quietly uncuffed him without looking him in the eye, a gesture that was as close to an apology as the situation had allowed her to make without crossing Pruitt. He sat on the metal bench along the cell wall. He looked at his wrists. The marks were deep. Pruitt had put the cuffs on tight with the specific intent of making them hurt. Marcus had noted this without surprise. Men like Pruitt always found the small cruelties. The little humiliations layered within the larger one. The knee pressed slightly harder than necessary. The cuffs ratcheted one click past functional. It was the signature of a specific kind of person. Marcus rubbed the mark slowly. He thought about the operation in West Africa. He thought about the compound outside of a city he was not permitted to name in any official context, and the 12 hours of the controlled chaos inside it, and the 2 men who had gone in with him and not come out. He thought about their faces. He thought about the conversations he would never have with them now, the way one of them had a habit of laughing at his own jokes before he finished telling them, the way the other one made coffee in the field that was objectively the best coffee Marcus had ever tasted, using equipment that should not have been capable of producing it. He thought about their families. He had attended both services. He had stood in his dress uniform in 2 different churches, in 2 different states, and looked at 2 sets of faces that were trying to understand something that does not fully resolve into understanding. He thought about all of this now sitting in a holding cell in a suburban police station because the mind goes where it needs to go when the body is constrained. And what his mind arrived at was not anger. It was something more like proportion. This, he thought, looking at the fluorescent light above the cell, is not the hardest room I have ever been in. Not even close. He had been in rooms where the outcome was genuinely uncertain, where the variables were stacked against him and the math did not clearly resolve in his favor. This room had a certain outcome. He could not yet see the exact shape of it. But he had been doing this long enough to understand the architecture of situations, and this situation had a specific architecture. A phone call was being made. The call was reaching people who could move institutions. The institutions would move. And when they did, Dale Pruitt would discover that the thing he had built his identity on was not as solid as he had believed. Marcus had been certain of this from the moment the cuffs went on. Certainty, in his experience, was not arrogance. It was pattern recognition. He had seen a lot of men who believed the rules did not apply to them. He had seen what happened when those men were finally placed in a context where the rules applied very precisely. He closed his eyes. He let the fluorescent hum be what it was, and he waited. Because waiting for a man who had spent 14 years in one of the most demanding professional contexts in human existence was simply another skill. Kevin Story sat in the patrol cruiser in the station parking lot for 40 minutes after Pruitt had gone inside. He did not know what to do with himself. He had been a police officer for 8 months. 8 months was not long enough to have developed a calcified sense of how things worked, which meant he was still in the phase where his gut could tell him things he did not yet know how to act on. His gut was telling him a great deal. He had stood at the park and filmed nothing, said nothing, done nothing, while a man who had done nothing was put in handcuffs and driven away. He was going to have to testify. He knew this already. He had known it from the moment the first phone lit up. He had seen the footage. He was on the footage. Standing by the cruiser, watching, not participating, but not intervening either. There was a difference between those two things. He was trying to determine if the difference was enough. He pulled out his phone. He called his father, who was retired law enforcement 30 years with the Guilford County Sheriff's Office. His father picked up on the second ring. His father listened to the full account without interrupting. When Story finished, there was a silence. Then his father said, "Tell the truth." That was all. Tell the truth, and tell it first and tell it completely. Story sat in the cruiser for another 10 minutes. Then he went inside and asked to speak to Chief Okafor. Chief Sandra Okafor had joined the Crestwood PD 16 years ago as a beat officer. She had made chief 4 years prior, which was not a smooth ascent. It was a difficult one. She had spent 14 months building a case against Dale Pruitt because she understood that men like Pruitt were not aberrations. They were what happened when an institution decided that protecting its own was more important than examining what its own was actually doing. She had joined the force because she believed in what it was supposed to be. She had stayed because she believed it could still be made into what it was supposed to be. When Story sat in her office and told her everything, she listened with her hands folded on the desk and her face very still. When he finished, she asked him 2 questions. "Are you willing to put this in writing?" "Yes." "Are you willing to testify to it?" "Yes." She thanked him. She was not warm about it because the situation did not call for warmth. But she was clear. "What you are doing is the right thing," she said. "I know that it does not feel uncomplicated. It is not uncomplicated, but it is right." Story nodded. She sent him home for the rest of the shift. She watched him go, then turned to the window. 14 months. She had her incident. She had everything she needed. The press conference that Marcus gave outside the station that evening drew coverage from every major outlet in the state and several national ones. He had changed into a clean shirt. He stood slightly back from the microphone, in the way of a man who does not require the microphone to be heard, and he spoke for less than 2 minutes. He did not describe his own pain at any length. He described the pattern. He said that what had happened to him that morning happened to people every day in this country, to people who did not have a general's phone number in their wallet, to people who did not have a platoon that would fly in on their own time to sit in a courtroom and make their presence felt. He said that the Cole Webb Foundation, which did not yet exist, but which would exist within 30 days, was not going to be about him. It was going to be about those peepees people. The ones without the numbers in the wallet. The ones who needed someone to call. When he stepped back from the microphone, Diane Osei stepped forward and provided the legal details in the precise and efficient manner of someone who has done this many times and understands that clarity is its own form of power. The crowd of reporters asked questions for 20 minutes. Marcus answered none of them. He stood slightly behind Osei with his arms at his sides and let her handle the questions, because the questions were largely strategic and strategy was her domain. He was thinking about the foundation. He was thinking about the name. Cole Webb. Cole first. Because Raymond Cole had made a phone call from a sidewalk in Crestwood with the unhurried certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and because of that phone call the outcome of that day had been what it was, and because Marcus Webb had been shaped in the ways that mattered most by that man, it seemed right that his name came first. The trial occupied 3 days of testimony and 1 day of deliberation. On the 4th day, the jury foreman stood and read the verdict. Marcus sat in the public gallery and listened to each count. He did not allow himself to feel anything until it was finished. This was training. You do not allow yourself to feel the mission while the mission is ongoing. You debrief after. The verdict finished. Judge Ashworth sentenced Pruitt. The gavel came down. Marcus felt something release in his chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something more like pressure equalizing. The specific feeling of a situation resolving into its correct outcome after a period of sustained uncertainty. He looked at his wrists. The marks were gone now, faded weeks ago, but he remembered them. He thought he probably always would. Outside the courthouse, standing in the October afternoon, Cole appeared beside him without announcement. Cole had a way of doing this. Appearing, as if proximity were a decision he made without the intermediate step of moving. Marcus looked at him. Cole looked at the street. "You did that right," Cole said. Marcus did not respond immediately. "You always told me that the mission outcome is secondary to how you conduct yourself inside the mission," Marcus said finally. Cole nodded. "You conducted yourself correctly." They stood in the afternoon light for a moment. The press was still at the bottom of the steps, disassembling equipment, filing reports, moving on to the next story. The 6 men from the platoon came out of the courthouse behind them. They gathered loosely. No formation. No structure, just the natural proximity of men who trust each other completely. One of them clapped Marcus once on the shoulder. That was all. No speech, no summary. They had come. They had stayed. They had stood in that courtroom. That was the statement. Diane Osei transferred the judgment funds to the foundation's account within 15 days of the verdict. The paperwork had been prepared in advance. Osei was not a woman who waited on paperwork. The foundation's first case came in 2 weeks later. A veteran in Fayetteville. Army 8 years. 2 tours. Pulled over on a county road at 11 at night. No moving violation. License current. Registration current. Detained for 40 minutes while the officer ran his name through every database available. He had called a number he found on a flyer at the VA clinic. The number connected to the Cole Webb Foundation. Within 48 hours, he had legal representation. The case resolved in his favor 6 weeks later. Marcus was not at the courthouse for that case. He was on a plane to a location he was not permitted to discuss. But he knew the outcome. Osei sent him a single text. First one, won. He read it somewhere over the Atlantic and felt briefly the same pressure equalization he had felt in that courtroom. The foundation was not going to solve everything. He understood that with the same clarity with which he understood most things. But it was going to solve something for specific people in specific moments when they needed it. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was what Marcus Webb had learned over 14 years of serving in some of the most difficult circumstances a human being can be placed in, was the only kind of work worth doing. Not the work that solves everything, the work that solves what is in front of you. With everything you have, every time, There is a particular quality to silence in a room where something irreversible has just happened. It is different from ordinary silence. Ordinary silence is the absence of sound. This kind of silence is the presence of something too large for sound to contain. The courtroom had gone to that silence when the jury foreman finished reading the final count. Guilty, 4 times. Pruitt had stood with his hands on the table, and his body doing the involuntary calculations of a man who is processing a new reality against the framework of the old one. 10 years. He was 47 years old. He would be 57 when he walked out, if he walked out. The federal system was not friendly to former law enforcement. Protective custody would keep him physically safe, but 23 hours a day alone in a concrete room for 10 years was its own kind of sentence layered within the legal one. He had thought until very recently that he understood what time felt like. He had spent 22 years inside the structure of shifts and overtime and union meetings and retirement projections. Time had been a thing he moved through in a uniform. Now, time was going to be something different, an empty field with no landmarks. He was thinking about this as the marshals came to the defense table, and he was still thinking about it when they led him through the side door past the row of reporters who were already transmitting the verdict, past the bailiffs who looked at him with the careful neutrality of people who have seen this happen before, and into the holding area behind the courtroom. He sat on a bench. He still had his cheap suit on. A marshal sat across from him, not unkindly, but not warmly either, in the specific professional neutrality of someone whose job is proximity and not judgment. Pruitt looked at his hands. 22 years of this. These hands had cuffed hundreds of people, had filed hundreds of reports, had signed their name to documents that determined what happened to other people's lives. He had never thought of those hands as the problem. He had never stood far enough outside himself to see what his hands actually were. He was starting to now. General Raymond Cole did not stay for the sentencing portion. He had stayed for the verdict. He had heard the 4 counts read. He had stood with Marcus briefly on the courthouse steps. Then he had driven back to his house on Whitmore Street in Crestwood. He was 68 years old, and his hip was worse in the afternoons. He had learned over the course of a long life to spend his energy where it mattered, and to conserve it when the primary work was done. The primary work was done. He sat in the kitchen of his house and made a cup of coffee, not because he particularly wanted coffee at that hour, but because making coffee was something to do with his hands while he thought. He thought about Marcus. He had known Marcus Webb since the young man was 22 years old, which meant he had now known him for 14 years. He had watched him become something extraordinary in the way that certain people become extraordinary, not through accident or luck, but through a sustained decision to meet every situation with more than it required. He had also watched Marcus carry things that were invisible to most people. The weight of the 2 men who had not come back. The weight of 14 years of operating in places and circumstances that leave marks on a person, not always visible marks, but structural ones, the way stress marks a material without breaking it. He had watched Marcus sit on a bench in a park and be treated as a threat, and he had watched Marcus endure it with a composure that Cole recognized from his own long experience as the composure of a man who has decided that dignity is not something anyone else can grant or revoke. You either have it or you do not. Marcus had it. He had always had it. Cole drank his coffee. He thought about the foundation. He thought about his name on it. He had not asked for that, but he understood why it was there. Because this work was not finished. It would not be finished in his lifetime. It was the kind of work that had to be passed forward. Naming things was one way of passing them forward. He finished his coffee. He washed the cup. He looked out the kitchen window at the street. A neighbor walked by with a stroller. The evening light was starting to go golden on the rooftops. Crestwood. He had chosen it for its quiet. He had not expected it to become the location of something that mattered, but things that matter have a way of finding the location regardless of what you chose it for. Dana Pruitt was in Greensboro when the verdict was read. She did not watch the news coverage. She had stopped watching news coverage about the trial 6 weeks prior because Travis had been watching with her and had asked with the specific terrible clarity of an 11-year-old who does not know what he is not supposed to understand whether his father was a bad person. She had turned the television off and answered the question as honestly as she could. Your father made choices. She said that hurt people who did not deserve to be hurt. That makes those choices bad. What that makes him is something you will have to decide for yourself someday. Not today. Travis had accepted this in the way children accept things that are too large for them, which was to file it somewhere deep and go back to being 11 years old for as long as 11-year-old things would hold him. She learned the verdict from her sister, who texted her a single word: guilty. Dana sat with the word for a long time. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She had expected something cleaner. Satisfaction or relief or the specific completion of something that had been hanging. What she felt was more complicated. She felt the verdict land in the place where her marriage used to be, and she felt it settle there without resolving anything. Because the verdict was about Dale. And her grief was not about Dale. Her grief was about what she had not known. 17 complaints, 13 involving Black and Latino men, all buried. She had been married to him for 16 years. She had known he was hard. She had known he was rigid in the way certain men are rigid who believe that the world has a correct order, and their job is to maintain it. She had not known about the complaints. She had not known what happened in the car that day, or the words he had used when he thought the camera was off. She had not known because she had not asked. That was the thing she was living with now, not guilt. Something quieter and more persistent than guilt. The knowledge that she had shared a life with someone for 16 years and had not looked closely enough at what he actually was. She did not know what to do with that. She was learning how to carry it. The Cole Webb Foundation hired its first full-time staff member in January. A woman named Priya Harman, former JAG Corps attorney, 13 years. She had left the military 2 years prior and had spent the intervening time doing private practice work that paid well and meant nothing to her in the way that some work means nothing technically adequate but spiritually inert. She had heard about the foundation through a colleague. She had applied without telling anyone, because she did not want to explain why she was leaving a stable and well-compensated position for a startup nonprofit, with a single famous case behind it and a large question mark ahead. Marcus had interviewed her on a Wednesday afternoon via video call. He was in a location he described as warm, which was all the specificity he offered. She had expected, based on the press coverage, a man with an agenda. She got a man with a question. What would you do differently, he asked. From what already exists, she told him. She told him for 20 minutes. She talked about the gap between crisis intervention and sustained legal support. She talked about the veteran population's specific legal vulnerabilities and the ways existing systems failed to address them. She talked about documentation, about early intervention, about the difference between reacting to violations and preventing escalation before it reached the point of cuffs and courtrooms. She talked without stopping to check whether she was saying too much. When she finished, Marcus said, "Start in 2 weeks." That was the interview. Story left the Crestwood PD in December. He was not fired. He resigned. He had been interviewed extensively in the internal review and the federal investigation, and his testimony had been clear and consistent and had contributed to the weight of the case against Pruitt. He had done what his father told him to do. He had told the truth. But telling the truth inside an institution does things to your relationship with that institution that cannot be undone. He was not hostile to his fellow officers. They were not hostile to him. But there was a changed quality to the air whenever he walked into the station, the specific changed quality of a room where someone has done something that altered the social contract, and everyone is now navigating the aftermath. He did not enjoy navigating the aftermath. He applied to the sheriff's office in neighboring Cabarrus County. He put the Crestwood experience fully on his application, including his role in the Webb incident and his subsequent testimony. The sheriff interviewed him personally. He asked Story why he had not intervened at the park. Story said, "I did not understand in the moment that what I was seeing was wrong. I had been trained to defer to a senior officer. When I realized what I had been trained into, I corrected it the only way I could, which was to tell the truth when asked." He paused. "I would not make the same mistake a second time." The sheriff offered him the position. He took it. He drove different roads now. He stopped different people. He was learning deliberately and carefully how to do the job the way it was supposed to be done. It was slower than he had expected, more complicated than he had expected. He found that he did not mind the complexity. Complexity, he was learning, was what the job actually required. Everything else was a shortcut. And shortcuts were how you ended up in courtrooms. On a Tuesday morning, 6 months after the verdict, Marcus Webb sat on a bench in Crestwood Park with a cup of black coffee in both hands. He had arrived at 9:40, which was 3 minutes earlier than the first time. Some habits are older than the events that test them. The park was the same, the oak trees, the fountain, the path where the joggers went. The bench was the same bench. He sat on it, and he felt it exactly as it was. Cold iron. Solid. Permanent in the way of things that were made before anyone thought too carefully about permanence. He thought about all of it. He thought about what it had cost him and what it had given him. The cost was not invisible. He had spent 3 months in legal proceedings that required him to relive a morning he would not have chosen to relive. He had spent hours in depositions and consultations and press arrangements. He had spent energy on this when his energy was already committed to other things. He had thought about those 2 men from West Africa every single day. He would continue to think about them. But he had also built something. The foundation was real now. It had real staff and real cases and real people on the other end of the phone whose situations were changing because someone picked up. That was real. And he was sitting on a bench in a park on a Tuesday morning, drinking coffee freely in a town where a certain kind of man had believed that a certain kind of person had to earn the right to sit on a bench in a park on a Tuesday morning. That man was in federal custody, and Marcus was here, still here. A cruiser rolled past on the park road. The new officer. Young. She had been here 3 times in the months he had been visiting. She had figured out by the second visit that the man on the bench with the coffee was not a problem to be assessed. He was a man on a bench with a coffee. She raised 2 fingers off the wheel. He raised his cup. She kept driving. He watched her go. The morning opened around him like something that had been waiting to be inhabited. He inhaled. He exhaled. He looked at the tree line. He thought, this is the thing, not the verdict, not the foundation, not the testimony or the legal fees or the press conference on the courthouse steps. This, a morning, a bench, coffee that was getting cold, a park that was just a park, the right to be in it simply without demonstration or justification, without having to be a lieutenant commander or a SEAL or a decorated veteran to deserve 5 minutes of peace. Just a man, sitting, free. That was the thing that Dale Pruitt had tried to take. And that was the thing that had proven impossible to take, because it was not something Dale Pruitt had ever possessed the authority to grant. Marcus finished his coffee. He sat for a while longer. Then he stood, dropped the empty cup in the trash can at the path's edge, and walked toward Whitmore Street. Raymond Cole would have the coffee on. There was work to discuss. There was always work. And Marcus Webb, for the first time in longer than he could precisely recall, was glad of it.